He stood silent as they ridiculed him, accused him, and handed down their verdict. But when he made one phone call, everything shifted. What kind of man can rattle a courtroom without raising his voice? If that question tugs at you, you're right where you need to be. Let me take you back to the moment he entered that courtroom alone, underestimated, and carrying a truth no one saw coming. The old wooden door creaked as it opened, a soft groan breaking the courtroom's hushed anticipation. A few heads turned, but most didn't bother. Men like him didn't command attention anymore. Yet he walked in, slow and steady, not with hesitation but with a purpose that seemed to bend time itself, as if no one else had the right to hurry him. His name was William Harper, 79 years old. His frame still held the solid lines of a man who'd carried burdens heavier than steel, though his shoulders now stooped slightly under the weight of years. He wore a faded blue flannel shirt, pressed but worn thin, and pants bleached by countless seasons. His boots, scuffed yet polished with care, spoke of a man who faced the world with dignity, no matter how it treated him. In his calloused hands, he held a wool cap, soft and creased from decades of use, cradled like a relic, not for show but for memory. As he reached the defense table, whispers slithered through the room, not loud, but sharp, like nettles. Another vagrant. Why waste time on him? Just a squatter clogging the docket. Well, Harper didn't react. He'd heard it before at train stations, in bank lobbies, in the doorways of buildings he'd once helped shape from dust. He set his cap gently on the table, folded his hands with quiet reverence, and raised his eyes not to the judge, not to the ceiling, but straight ahead, steady as stone. The docket listed his offense: unlawful occupation of condemned property. To the court, it was a minor infraction, a checkbox. They didn't see the truth. Will had spent less than an hour on the porch of the house he'd built with his own hands, where his wife, Esther, used to sing their son to sleep, where he'd stained the railings every spring until arthritis made ladders treacherous. It was the place where he'd last held Esther's hand as her breath faded, her warmth slipping away. On paper, the house wasn't his anymore. But the land remembered him, and so did he. Will hadn't brought a lawyer or rallied supporters. He came alone, not because no one would stand with him, but because this moment was his to bear. He didn't flinch when Judge Leonard Grayson entered, robes rustling with the weight of routine. He didn't shift when his name was called. He'd been judged before, in grander rooms, for lesser reasons. But today, he wasn't here to plead. He was here to test whether justice still had the courage to meet his gaze. No one in that room could have guessed that Will Harper, the man they'd barely noticed, held the blueprint for what fairness was meant to be. Judge Grayson, a man whose passion for the law had long faded to monotony, opened the case file with a careless flick, his face etched with boredom. Harper, William, 79, charged with unlawful occupation of city property. He droned, a faint smirk curling his lip. Same old story. His tone wasn't harsh, just tired, and that was worse. Boredom erases a man faster than cruelty. Let me guess, Grayson said, not bothering to look up. No fixed address, no counsel, no job in years, no regard for the laws you keep breaking. Will didn't blink. At the clerk's desk, Priya Sharma paused, her pen hovering. Something in the judge's dismissiveness stirred a memory, a younger man at a city council meeting, sleeves rolled up, pointing to blueprints with pride. She shook her head. No, it can't be. But she kept watching. Grayson grunted, his patience thin. We don't have time, Mr. Harper. This docket's full of folks who think their feelings trump property rights. He finally looked up, squinting at Will, but he didn't see a craftsman or a widower. He saw what he wanted, an old black man, worn out, alone, on the wrong side of the law. Let me be clear, Grayson said, leaning forward, his voice sharp. The city owes you nothing. Memories aren't deeds. The courtroom stayed silent, a quiet that felt like complicity. No one spoke up. No one objected. Except, perhaps, in the way Will sat not slumped in defeat, but anchored, his presence a silent defiance. Priya glanced at the docket again, whispering to herself, this isn't right. He's not who they think. Grayson cleared his throat. 2 minutes, Mr. Harper. Say something before I sentence you. Will didn't stand or pull out a speech. He raised his eyes, calm and unyielding, and said, I'll speak when you're ready to hear me. Grayson scoffed, leaning back, his hand drifting lazily to the gavel, as if swatting a fly. He didn't think what was worth the effort. But in that stillness, the room felt a tremor, the kind that hums before the ground shifts. "Mr. Harper," Grayson barked. "Are you speaking or stalling?" Will blinked slowly, then spoke, his voice low but steady, cutting through the room like a river through stone. "That house was mine once. I helped build this city." Grayson chuckled, a dry, hollow sound. "Built the city? That's rich." Across the aisle, a young reporter, Ethan Morales, paused mid-tweet, fingers frozen over his phone. He'd planned to write something snarky. "Old man claims he built the city." Courtroom laughs, but Will's voice didn't sound like a boast. It sounded like truth, polished by time. Will continued, his words soft but heavy. "I held a chisel before I could read. I built walls to shelter the weary, rooms to hold the grieving, spaces to catch people's final breaths with grace." His voice never rose, but each syllable landed like a brick. "I built places meant to heal. Now I sit before walls that judge." The room didn't gasp, it breathed slower, as if finding its rhythm. Priya's eyes stung, that old memory clawing free. Ethan lowered his phone. Grayson tapped the file, restless. "So you think your past excuse is trespassing?" Will met his gaze, not with anger, but with a deep weariness. "No, sir. I'm saying the law's got a memory problem." The words hung there, heavier than the gavel Grayson raised without flourish. 30 days in county jail, he declared, the sentence flat and final. Will didn't wince. He glanced at his worn leather watch, then looked up. "May I make one call?" Grayson sneered. "What? To your old bar buddies?" Will said nothing. Procedure forced the court to comply. A bailiff handed him a phone. Will didn't hesitate. He dialed a number from memory, pressed the phone to his ear, and spoke 3 words. "It's time now." He handed the phone back, calm as ever, and sat down. No one knew what he'd set in motion. Then, from the hallway, a sound click, 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 the sharp, steady rhythm of heels on marble, unhurried, undeniable. The courtroom doors swung open, and in walked a woman, tall and poised, dressed in a plain gray suit, no flash, no fuss. Her name was Lorraine Harper, Will's daughter. She moved with a quiet power that needed no permission, her hand resting briefly on her father's shoulder, no words needed. From her coat, she pulled a slim leather folder and set it on the defense table, not with drama, but with absolute certainty. Inside were documents, property records, city commendations, architectural certifications, all signed, notarized, sealed. Each page screamed the truth. Will Harper hadn't trespassed. He'd come home. Judge Grayson's mouth opened, but no words came. Lorraine spoke, her voice clear, slicing through the room's haze. "My father didn't ask for favors or pity. He asked to sit on the porch he built." Every word peeled back the courtroom's arrogance. Grayson stammered, his face paling, and finally croaked, "Motion granted." It wasn't mercy, it was surrender. The room didn't cheer or clap. It exhaled, like it had been holding its breath for decades. Will stood slowly, lifted his wool cap, and placed it on his head with care. He walked out, not in victory, but in truth. At the door, he paused, turning slightly to the room. "Start listening," he said, his voice free of bitterness. "Start seeing." It was a quiet command from a man whose life was too vast for any courtroom to hold. Sometimes, justice doesn't roar. It walks in scuffed boots, carrying nothing but memory and the unshakable weight of dignity.